name's Rhonda Ascierto. I'm a Research Director of Data Center Technologies at 451 Research. We're an independent analyst firm. That means I don't get paid to say anything nice about anybody or any product. We have about 100 analysts globally, and we cover the spectrum of enterprise IT from the core to the edge. My team looks specifically at data center technologies at the facilities layer. The 451 group also owns the Uptime Institute, which is probably best known for its data center tier certifications. The Uptime also has a membership network of operators and owners of some of the world's largest data centers and some of the biggest portfolios of data centers. Now, this is a closed network membership network, but it's my privilege as a 451 research analyst to participate in that network. And a lot of those conversations really inform our research and our insights and our direction. We speak to a lot of people, and almost every conversation comes up the public cloud. The competition from the public cloud growth, it's already explosive. But the thing to bear in mind is that we're just at the beginning of it. As Bill Gates said, cloud will have less impact in 2 years than we think, and more, far more, in 10. What does he mean by that? The cloud really does change everything. Workloads are changing. It means that no data center works alone. Costs, revenue, and business models are changing across the board. And amidst all of this, colos really are uniquely positioned. I would say to you that yes, the public cloud is a threat, but it's also an opportunity for those who can adapt. I just love this quote from Charles Darwin. It's not the strongest of the species that will survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change. And that's never been truer for your industry. So this is my agenda for this morning. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about exactly what is changing, what's really going on out there. And then I'm going to talk about imperatives for success. Now, it's not my role as an industry watcher to tell you how to run your business, and nor should it be. But I would like to share with you some of the insights that we see from the most successful and the fastest growing companies in your industry. It focuses around efficiency, trust, and agility, which also means transparency and proactiveness. And then finally, I'd like to spend just a little bit of time looking out on the horizon for the next 3 to 5 to 10 years and determining whether some of these things are indeed threats or opportunities. So understanding this changing landscape. I don't have any numbers up here. There are many different numbers out there. But this hockey stick curve of growth around IT demand is only set to continue. Nobody thinks anything different. The world's becoming more digitized, our society's becoming more connected, people and devices. The growth is explosive and it's only going to continue. And this is creating demand for real-time compute or near real-time compute more so than ever. So there should be opportunity for everybody. Demand continues to grow. Now here's a look at cloud computing, which of course is also growing. This is an aggregate supplier revenue globally. We peg the industry to be growing from a supply point of view, and this is just enterprise cloud computing, mind you. At about 20% through to the end of the decade, where we think it's going to be worth around more than $40 billion. But what's interesting about this chart is that it's not an even growth. It's not all infrastructure as a service, which you can see on the bottom here in blue. Infrastructure software as a service and platform as a service is actually growing at a slightly faster pace. And we see a bit of an evening out toward the end of the decade. And Amazon Web Services is the 800-pound gorilla in this industry. It owns roughly 50% of the market, and it's going to be very tough for somebody to catch up to them. They're trying, and they're finding it pretty tough. So we expect Amazon to continue to dominate through to the next decade, at least. So what does this mean for enterprise IT? This is a survey that my colleagues at Uptime ran, and we asked enterprises, where is your IT running? you can see that most enterprise IT still runs in privately owned on-premises enterprise data centers. And about a quarter or so runs in a colo, and less than 10% running in the public cloud. And you can see from 2014 to 2015, enterprise IT running in enterprise data centers is shrinking. And that's true no matter how we cut the market. We count data centers, we look at supply side, we look at demand side, this is the demand side. And every way we look at it, we see the enterprise sector shrinking. It's not going to go away. We certainly don't believe it's going to go away, but it is shrinking. Enterprise data centers are consolidating, and they're becoming larger, oftentimes into larger centralized premium facilities. Whereas colo and public cloud continue to grow. Is this a leading indicator? In our opinion, we think it is. So this means for enterprises that a hybrid data center infrastructure really is becoming the new norm. This is the same survey, and half of those enterprise senior executives told us that they expect the majority of their workloads to be running off-premises in the future. Of those, 70% expect it to happen by 2020, and 23% expect it to happen next year. There's an undeniable trend toward outsourcing. There's a huge appetite for it. They want to outsource as much as they can, but they don't want to outsource at all. So the question, of course, is who's going to get all of this business? Will it be the public cloud? Will it be colocation? Will it be service providers? Of course, the public cloud providers want it all. So if you go to an Amazon Web Services conference like I do, you know the people working at Amazon because they're running around wearing these t-shirts. It's a pretty in-your-face message. And, you know, as I said, it's not just infrastructure as a service anymore, and it's not just PaaS, and it's not just SaaS. It's storage, it's disaster recovery, it's application hosting. It runs the gamut of enterprise IT. Now, Amazon and its colleagues, its peers, their capabilities across the different areas is very uneven, but they absolutely are investing aggressively. They want it all. But for enterprises, the public cloud is not a panacea. This is another survey we ran, about 1,500 enterprise senior executives, primarily in North America and Europe, but also in Asia-Pac and the Middle East. And again, this is a very familiar pattern that we're seeing in all the surveys we run. Risk is a top barrier and has been and continues to be, and we think will continue to be for enterprise cloud adoption. It's not so much cost. Migration and integration, absolutely a pain point for public cloud, but primarily it's around risk. Security, compliance, data regulation, data sovereignty, and location. And it's really interesting when you step back a bit from IT and you just look at business priorities and business goals generally. We asked businesses, more than 1,500 in the last few years, we've been asking them, if you had to allocate 100 points among these 5 goals as they relate to your company, lower risk, time to market, improving quality of service, or just purely lowering your costs, or purely increasing your revenue. You can see that in the past few years, lowering risk and speeding time to market is increasing as a general business goal. Quality of service relatively flat, but the focus just on lowering costs and just on increasing revenue is actually getting smaller. So this isn't a race to the bottom, by no means whatsoever. So let's look specifically at colocation providers. We asked enterprises to rate these criteria in importance, with 0 being not at all important and 10 being extremely important for when they're choosing a colocation provider. And you can see again, lowering risk and having high availability, top priorities for them, top criteria for them in choosing a colo. As well, of course, of connectivity. I'm going to get to connectivity a little later on. This is pretty good news. Even better news is that generally speaking, your customers are happy. 60%, nearly 60% are satisfied with their primary or largest contract at a colo. To varying degrees, but they're generally happy, compared to just 11% of those who are dissatisfied, again, to varying degrees. So this is good news, but what's disconcerting is that it hollows out in the middle. You can see that nearly 1/3 are neutral. They're neither happy nor unhappy. And so that's your opportunity to lose. And what are their pain points? Well, over 40% that we surveyed said that they ended up paying more for co-location than they initially expected. Even worse, nearly 1/3 had experienced an outage at a colo provider. And of those, over 60% said that the SLA penalty clause did not adequately offset the cost of that outage. So nearly 1/3 had an outage, and for most of those, it really hurt. So there's absolutely room for improvement. So there is a lot of change going on. What this tells me is that for some, change will be very good, and for others, not so good. Yes, demand continues to be explosive, but the competitive pressures are building. Now, there are new opportunities emerging, and I'm going to get to those in a minute. But those who are going to succeed will be those who are best positioned and those who can optimize their businesses and their facilities. It's really all about planning. This really reminds me of something my mother would say. It's not about bad luck, it's about bad planning. Pull yourselves together. Okay, so how to do that? What are the imperatives for success? Well, let's start with efficiency. Now, efficiency is nothing new, but it's more important today than it ever has been. And that's because public cloud prices are falling. We actually have, believe it or not, cloud economists as analysts. They have PhDs in cloud economics, much younger than me. So they track the prices, they have been for a number of years, for, in the blue line, it's on-demand cloud services, and the orange line is more long-term contracts. And the aggregate of those, in the last 2.5 years, prices have fallen by 8%. What's slightly terrifying is that when they project it out, they expect these prices to fall 5% just in the next 12 months. Cloud, the competitive pressure from low-cost available cloud services is only going to increase. At the same time, almost every CapEx and OpEx item in data centers is falling. So what this means is that if you're building a data center today, in 2 to 3 years' time, you could be competing against somebody who's building at a lower cost. You need to defer your cost today, or you need to be able to build, design, and develop as cheaply as possible. So how can you do this? This is a very rough approximation of data center lifecycle costs. Obviously, the depreciation rate for IT is much faster. And you as a colocation provider or a wholesaler have really little to no control over the IT. I'm going to be talking about operations in a minute, but let's just focus on facility infrastructure. How do you lower your lifecycle costs for facility infrastructure? Well, two main ways. One is to reduce redundancy. Now, I'm in no way suggesting you build lower tier data centers, but what we are beginning to see with some of the more forward-thinking providers is that they're not building tier 3 necessarily or tier 3 equivalent across the entire facility. They're having different redundancy zones because not every workload requires high redundancy and high availability. So we're beginning to see this notion of mixed tiers. The other way to reduce your facility infrastructure costs is to reduce over-provisioning. It's very much been a we'll build it and wait for them to come attitude. And that's changing. Where we're seeing the most competitive service providers today, they're building incrementally, more on an as-demand basis. And they're doing that using prefabricated modular data center architectures. And what is a prefab data center? Just to be clear, it's a component of a data center or indeed an entire data center that's built and tested in a factory, disassembled and transported on site where it's M&E connected, and off you go. Now, it's nothing new, right? Prefab has been around for a long time, and we've seen it succeed in many other industries. But with data centers, I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there in the data center world about prefab architectures, right? Everybody generally thinks they're those big ISO containers where you have to squeeze in, you've got one row and it's really, really difficult to do anything inside of it. Well, in the last few years, that's changed dramatically. There's been tremendous innovation in the prefab world for data centers. Every picture you see on here is a prefabricated modular component. So in the middle here, these are all-in-one, if you like, data center in a box, micro-modular data centers. There's different terms for them, but they can have UPS, their own cooling, EMS protection, pretty much everything. You just really need to have the available power to be able to plug it into the wall and off you go. Now, what's interesting here about this picture is that these don't necessarily operate in isolation. You can string them together and you can actually get quite a broad range, quite a big size of data center capacity. Now, unfortunately, data centers don't tend to run out of the same type of capacity in an even way, right? It's usually you run out of power first, or you run out of cooling, or you run out of space. And so we're seeing modules now. So there's one of cooling one up there in the right-hand corner. You can also get them for electrical components. You can even get, prefab genset, housing, and so on. So you can add just where you need it. And it's not just about ISO containers. So you can see here and here that these are contiguous white spaces, and they're expandable. The wall comes down, you bolt on another couple of aisles, and up it goes again. So the ability to build prefabricated and in a modular way doesn't limit your design choices. Over here, this is a stacked prefab facility that's been dropped into a warehouse. So with prefab, you can pretty much build a data center in any type of shell. It can be a slab floor, it can be a raised floor. The design choices are really, there is really no limit. We're seeing huge innovation. We're also seeing a supplier side boom. And over here, this is also prefab. This is a 3-story data center, entirely prefabricated, and it is a colo. So I just wanted to let you know, to show the adoption rate around this. It's still fairly low, but we are seeing tremendous interest in it. There are some colos out there who have built their entire business using prefab. And from a supplier point of view, we see this market being worth more than $4 billion in 2019, up from less than half of that in 2015. And that's a direct result of the innovation that's going in prefab. And when we ask people, why did you choose prefab? Particularly colos, why was it you chose to go a prefab route? And the word we hear over and over again is control. It's control over your CapEx and your costs, and it's also control over operations and outcomes, because the outcome and the operation of that facility are pretty much guaranteed by the supplier. Now, there's nothing inherently inefficient about a prefab modular data center, but what we are seeing are designs are generally very high efficiency. So I would encourage you to put aside any preconceived notions you may have around prefab and to take a second look, because we know that some of your biggest competitors and some of the most successful and fastest growing upstarts out there in your industry are looking at them. Okay, so let's move on to trust. Now, all data centers, they trade on reliability and performance, none more so than the colos, as we've already discussed. Now, certifications take time, they take money, but they're almost always worth doing. They really do speak a lot to customers. We see a lot of interest around certification from customers. It's usually one of the first things they ask about. Definitely worth doing. And it's worth noting too that insurers, data center insurers and financial underwriters for data centers, they also pay a lot of attention to certifications. They often struggle with how to value, for insurance purposes, a data center. certifications, I would say, are becoming almost table stakes in your industry. So you all know what the foundations of trust are to your business. It's availability, it's redundancy, it's recoverability, expertise and process, there are certifications for that now in the data center world, and security and compliance. This is all very well known to you. But this is changing. No data center operates alone. You need to understand that you're now part of an ecosystem of trust. Your end users want to know that their application is going to be protected and compliant end to end. And it's not going to run just through your data center. The chances are it's going to pass through several data centers. Multi-site resilience, network resilience is becoming key. And it's your role as a service provider to understand at least and have the conversation with them about their end-to-end compliance and security. And it absolutely means that you need to take a partnership approach. Because cloud has changed everything, and nothing more so than connectivity. So I just want to spend a little bit of time getting slightly in the weeds on connectivity. So cloud applications depend on the network. Not necessarily cloud-native applications, increasingly many or most types of applications are depending on the network. And this is because the ways in which applications are being designed is changing. Software containers, microservices, there are other terms out there, the hipsters and cloud word, the terminology hasn't really been worked out and they're still developing new ways to do it. But fundamentally what it means is that applications are becoming distributed and dynamic. So when they're dynamic and distributed, their dependence on the network grows, so the tolerance for network issues is much, much lower. And the network is often indeterminate. You know, if you're running over a public internet, it's highly unreliable generally. And you don't exactly know where that's being routed because of the way the internet's been designed. This is an example of some cloud active or cloud native applications. Twitter, Netflix, Halo. Now I know you can't read all of this, but each of these endpoints is a subsystem behind those applications. They're a software component, they're a subsystem, they're all required for these applications to work. And they don't all run in the same data center. And they don't all need the same level of latency either. But you can see that it's becoming increasingly complex. Now, these are sort of extreme examples. These are big internet applications. But increasingly, this is happening to all applications. So if you think about, say, a trucking company that has GPS tracking on its trucks, and it wants to show its customers where the trucks are. So maybe it wants to link to Google Maps. Now, if those trucks are carrying, you know, some commoditized, non-essential piece of equipment, maybe it's okay for that trucking company to be able to use the public internet to show Google Maps and to show where its trucks are. But if it's a healthcare company and those trucks are carrying vital organs, they need a trusted, secure connection to Google Maps. They need to know that with pinpoint accuracy where that truck is, it becomes far more important. I just want to clarify that all of these connections and all of this connectivity, it's not always about latency. So I had to book a ticket on British Airways recently, and I really wanted a specific flight. I found my flight, and then I was given the option for preferred seats, to pay a little bit more for my preferred seats. So I was happy to do that. I like to sit at the front. I like a window seat. So I went ahead, I booked my flight, and then about 30 seconds later, I get an email from BA saying, sorry, your seats weren't available, we're going to refund your money. So that subsystem of their application wasn't high latency. But it didn't really matter to me because I got the flight I wanted. The important subsystem of that application did have high latency, but the not so, you know, the nice to have, the seat I wanted didn't. That had low latency. So this isn't just about latency. It's more about secure, always-on connections. I'm just going to pause here. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. So here's a schema of where you as a colocation provider fit into this network layer. Colos have the best connections. Mark mentioned earlier the service provider that had 130 interconnects. Colos have the best connections. It's secure, always on connection. Latency can vary, but absolutely the best connections. Now you and your business, you may not have the resources and you may not need to build those direct ramps onto a cloud or onto another service provider directly, but you need to understand that your customers have those requirements. They may have those requirements, and you need to understand the networks and the applications. You need to be prepared to have that conversation with them. It probably means that you're going to need to partner perhaps with some of these exchanges. Maybe you get a point of presence in their facilities, or maybe you just have a partnership. But it really is changing the competitive landscape for you. It's not just competition, increasingly it's co-opetition. And of course, disaster recovery requires high bandwidth and reliable networks as well. So just to sum up on trust, take an end-to-end services view. Be prepared to have those conversations with your customers. Understand the network requirements they have and understand their associated IT. You don't have to provide every portion, and the reality is you probably couldn't anyway, but you need to have this relationship with your customers that goes beyond just power and pipes. It needs to be about understanding their IT. And I would suggest embracing recovery as well as availability, and I'll get to that a little later. It's becoming increasingly important. Okay, agility. Agility is a great word. What does it mean when you're a colocation provider? Well, in the short-term agility means being able to understand the impact of pricing choices, reducing energy, having your operations more of an on-demand basis, and then charging more according for demand. We are seeing an increase, particularly in the US, around consumption-based billing, and offering higher and low availability areas within your data center. It doesn't all have to be the one level of redundancy and availability, and of course being able to maintain your facility without disruption. Now you can determine today to do all of these things without a retrofit or without a major CapEx investment. Over the longer term, it's going to be increasingly important for you to foresee long-term demand changes and then to be able to build out on demand and with rapid deployment, more of a just-in-time capacity expansion. And again, that's where we see granular modular builds as being very interesting. You need to have the flexibility to be able to introduce new technologies and designs. It's not just the IT world where we're seeing a huge amount of innovation. There's also happening at the facilities layer. And your business model is likely going to need to change to some degree in the coming years, including having the ability to introduce add-on services. So to be able to do both short and long-term, to be flexible enough, to be agile enough to achieve all of these things, I would argue that you need the tools to do it, and those tools are data center management software. So you can see on the right here, it's a very simple schema of our data center maturity model. And most data centers today, colos and enterprises, are at level 1 or level 2. They're reactive and pretty low levels of efficiency. Where we're seeing agile data centers, those that are being proactive, are those more level 3, level 4 optimization, where you have more automatic systems, more of the software-driven type data centers. We're really not seeing much of that. In the colo world, we're seeing that mostly around cooling. We're seeing more and more colos adopt dynamic cooling optimization, where their fan speeds go up and down according to demand, or indeed they can turn CRAs off when they're not being utilized. Now, level 5 doesn't really exist today. This is the self-healing data center. The hyperscales are working really hard to get there, but it's a few years off at least. But that's certainly where the industry is going. Data center management software, or DCIM, enables you to be level 3 and level 4. You certainly are never going to get to level 5 without it. What's so great about DCIM, right? I just want to stress that DCIM is a tool, it's an approach. It's not going to transform your business for you, but without it, you won't have the visibility into your operations to be able to be agile. You already have a lot of data in your data centers today, but it's siloed, and it's probably in different formats, so you're not able to make apples-to-apples comparisons across data centers. And the key with DCIM for colos is that when you understand your resource consumption and your demand trends, you're able to align your service with your customers' demands. And critically, it enables capacity planning. That is the #1 driver for DCIM across all types of businesses. Here are a couple of screenshots of some colocation-specific DCIM. And you can see that some colos today are giving these tools to their customers, and it is enabling them to remotely see the physical layout of their racks. And of course, you've got trending over here as well. They're offering these to customers today at no charge. But the idea and the goal is that over time, as their systems become more sophisticated, as customers catch up, these will be value-added services. And of course, DCIM enables you to also get a real-time view across your data center portfolio. And we're beginning to see some interesting developments, around cloud-based DCIM on mobile devices. So this is having the data, drawing on data, running algorithms over hundreds, if not thousands of different customers to be able to do things like predictive maintenance. And we're expecting the first DCIM-based cloud service for UPS predictive maintenance to come out in the coming weeks. Absolutely where the future's heading. And if your customers can have visibility into your operations, you know, you're really talking the talk, walking the talk, excuse me. So I would encourage you to look closely at DCIM. Okay, so just to finish up, what's coming up on the horizon? Now, we talked about outsourcing, how there's a huge appetite for outsourcing. When we ask enterprises about the keys to outsourcing for them, it comes back to two things: flexibility and trust. When customers look to outsource, yes, they'll go to the public cloud. Yes, it's very inexpensive, highly available. They can burst when they need it. But for their mission-critical IT and other areas of IT, what they really want is they want an extension, a trusted extension of their own IT team. And colos, of course, are uniquely positioned for this. They know you. Maybe they're a new customer. At least they know where their data is. They want to be able to move from one option to another. And I would say that while today your business may not be around services, that we see services as being essential for future-proofing. Now, I'm not talking necessarily about next year or the year after, but say in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. It's not all going to go to the public cloud, and you're in a unique position to be able to offer them very low risk and high availability services. And I just wanted to give you a breakdown here of budgets. Again, this is from one of our surveys, a hosting and cloud budget. You can see that security services is one of the most important. Infrastructure hosting, also very important. And then application hosting and managed services. I'm just going to step into these a little bit to get you thinking about the types of services that customers are looking for help for. So this is a very large survey that we did that was actually commissioned by Microsoft. And you can see when it comes to infrastructure services, it's all sorts of things. It's hosted private cloud, it's basic website hosting, dedicated servers, and public cloud infrastructure as a service. Application services, security, #1. And you're, again, uniquely positioned to be able to provide the application security service, security application services. Email and so on. Security services, I'm not going to go through them all, and you know there are many different types, but I think that where we're seeing customers really like in colos for, is around here with disaster recovery. And when it comes to managed services, it comes back to backup and recovery here. Biggest. So start thinking about services. Olivier last night at Data 4 talked about, geeking out and how they're hiring software developers. Absolutely, that is definitely the way forward. Okay, switching gears a little bit. I know Mark touched on this with the Internet of Things. The thing to remember, we do a lot of surveys around the Internet of Things, and the data we get back is frankly crazy. It's the market for the Internet of Things the hype far exceeds the reality of deployments today. It's going to be very, very much vertical specific and application specific. I was going to share some of that data with you, but I thought that this cartoon sums it up best. We have to go out for dinner, the refrigerator isn't speaking to the stove. This is actually pretty accurate. There's a lot to be sorted out in the Internet of Things. Security, huge, huge problem. Protocols, communication protocols, there's no standardization. The technology stack, there's even confusion around which suppliers are going to provide which part of the stack. It's a bit of a mess, frankly. Now, Internet of Things, I agree with Mike, it's nothing new. In many industries, it's a new label on an old bottle of wine, right? Including the data center. DCIM is the Internet of Things for the data center. Your data center have a lot of data. It comes out of your UPSs, it comes out of your chillers, it comes out of your branch circuits, maybe you have some smart PDUs. DCIM pulls it all together, aggregates it, normalizes it, so then you can run analytics on it, and you can do predictive forecasting, and you can do condition-based maintenance and so on. DCIM makes your data center the Internet of Things. We see manufacturing, healthcare, and retail really investing the most in the Internet of Things. Yes, there are smart city deployments. They're primarily, frankly, very services-based. The technology component of it, we're seeing smart city deployments sort of aggregate around one service provider that's able to give them the business outcome they need and solve all of these issues for them. But we're just at the beginning of it. We really are. And I know you've seen some figures around the number of connected endpoints that are going to be out there in the coming years. It's absolutely going to happen, but it's going to take some time. So what does this mean for you as a co-location or a data center operator? This is a schema that we knocked up for the different types of data centers for the Internet of Things. And there are two main layers here, right? There's the edge layer that's close to the things themselves. It's going to require low latency. It could be a mix of fiber and wireless. It'll be really interesting when 5G comes out. And this is where a lot of the edge analytics is going to happen. And then you've got your core layer for long-term data analysis, archiving, and enterprise applications. Now, in this edge layer, we've got our cloudlets, which are like a Google Fiber Hut. That's probably the biggest deployment of micro data centers today, the Google Fiber Huts. And they're going to be an extension of a public cloud. Yes, absolutely, they're being built. And we're going to have micro data centers. I'm going to get to those in a minute. But what's really interesting for you is that if you have a data center in an urban environment, you're absolutely an Internet of Things edge data center. This isn't all about small gateways. It's not all about micro data centers. It is very much about location. And I know that some of the biggest colocation providers in the world are looking at ways in which they can provide not just the capacity close to the edge, but the services they may be able to offer on top of that. Maybe some data aggregation, some data cleaning, and maybe some time series analytics. So you are absolutely part of the Internet of Things already just by your location. So who knows how it's going to play out? We think this is how it's going to look. We think that micro data centers absolutely are going to play a key role in IoT at the edge layer. So these are all micro data centers. This guy here is actually liquid cooled. It's about 20 kilowatt capacity in there. And it's ruggedized. It's got handles. You can put it by the beach. You can have we call this the notion of having micro data centers embedded in buildings as the embedded data center. And it's really interesting because it becomes a real estate play then. If you're a high-rise office building, why not rent out your basement, to a colocation provider, and you could put a micro data center in here and be really close to where things are generating data. Of course, you can crane them on top of buildings. Over here is the walkie-talkie building in London. And we do expect more buildings to be designed for high amounts of capacity, of compute, And running up the center of the walkie-talkie is a UPS. Telcos are going to play a very key role as well. We're seeing telcos recently having quite a big appetite for wholesaling and outsourcing their data center operations. They seem to be more focused on their core capabilities and not so much on data center operations. So if you're a wholesaler, we do think telcos could be probably one of your customers coming soon, sometime soon. Okay, this is my last couple of slides. I just wanted to talk briefly about open compute and open data center architectures. I know we've got a session on it later on today. But we're hearing a lot more about open data center architectures from all sorts of customers, not just the hyperscales, it's the financials and it's other types of enterprises. So just a quick background, open compute began by Facebook, Intel and Rackspace. What you need to know about open compute at a very high level is that it uses taller racks than usual, and they're wider, they're 21-inch racks. Power distribution is in the rack. Open compute uses a hardened bus bar, and they're designed to have power backup in the rack. And we're seeing lithium-ion as the technology of choice here. Now, open compute doesn't have to have, there's nothing in the spec that says the power backup has to be in the rack, but open compute is absolutely pushing that forward as a design. And we're seeing a lot of suppliers move behind OCP, including our host today, as well as telcos. They began an OCP project last year. Huge interest around OCP, huge. I live in the US, and the data center conference of the year was always the green grid. But now it's open compute. And they run at the same time this year, and I saw more of my connections, if you like, at open compute, which meant they weren't at the green grid. Huge interest around this. But the reality is, only about 2% of all compute today runs through an open compute rack. Adoption remains doggedly low. And one of the reasons is these wider racks. They require custom-made servers. And it's really challenging if you're not a hyperscale to be able to go to an original design maker in Korea or wherever to procure these. And even if you can procure them, how are you going to test and validate it for enterprise needs? Now, there are some groups out there that are looking at this very closely and looking to do bulk purchasing of OCP servers and spread it out amongst a number of buyers. But that's what's really holding back open compute. Adoption remains really low. Now, very recently, LinkedIn came out with an alternative, the first real alternative to OCP. And it's called Open19. Very new, same deal with power distribution. It's in the rack. Open19 doesn't use a hardened bus bar, it uses clip-on power cables. And it's got the optional design for backup in the rack. It's too new yet. We haven't even seen an Open19 rack yet to know whether or not they're going to really push this distributed UPS design with having the backup in the rack. But they're standard-sized racks. So this means any type of motherboard component can go in an Open19 rack. And the goal is for them to have suppliers actually integrate the servers in the rack, so they call it rack and roll. It's pretty compelling. And when we look at hyper-converged systems and converged systems where you have storage and with the servers, or you have the racks fully populated, like a V block, we're seeing huge growth in converged racks. Enterprises really like them. You probably have some of them in your own data centers. So this is beginning to look pretty interesting. And the target market is the mid-market, including co-location. It's a bit too early to talk about it yet, but for sure Open19 plans to target you, the colos, with their Open 19 designs. Now, it's not quite as efficient. It's not quite as efficient as Open Compute, but versus standard deployments, standard architectures, it is highly efficient. So, you know, you can't always get what you want, but you might find you get what you need. That's sort of my unofficial mantra I've created for Open 19. So what does this mean for you? What happens if Open 19 takes off? What happens if Open Compute becomes more accessible to more people? It means that the racks, your customers' racks, will provide the power distribution. Does that mean that you, the colo, will have to provide the rack? And what if you've commissioned backup power? You've invested in some fantastic Schneider UPSs, but your customers don't want to use it because they want to put lithium ion in the rack. What to do? So we don't know is the answer, but one thing that makes sense to us is you create a separate room for open architecture customers, potentially. And the way to do that, again, prefab it. You don't need to do a redesign, you don't need to do a retrofit. But chances are that at some future point in the next, 3 to 5 years, you may be have customers come to you and they won't want centralized UPS, but they will want generator backup, they will want connections to generators. And the other thing to bear in mind is that because of the way these open data center architectures have been designed, is that densities may also be much higher. So I just wanted to leave you on the note of that. It's my final thought. Just to wrap up, the spread amongst data centers, including colos, from poor to good to very good is widening. There's a divide between efficient, agile, well-positioned, trusted data centers and those that are not. And that divide is widening. And I would say you need to decide today which side of that divide you want to fall on. So with that, thank you very much. I think we now have some time for some Q&A with Mark.
Great. If you guys want to come take a seat up here, we'll get you started. Thank you very much, Rhonda.